Ooh, got it. Now we're recording. Things are official now, Chris. So what I was saying is like sometimes I have like PowerPoint pictures, but that feels really cheesy, especially for a Saturday morning. But so I got into financial services after going through physical therapy school and practicing clinically. And kind of the way that that worked is I ended up in physical therapy school. I'd always had like an interest in business because my dad had been a business owner, and then he got into sales, and then the company he was with said, we pay you too much, we could hire, it's actually not like PT or just rehab. It's hey, we can hire four of you for what we could, four young guys for what we pay you, type of a situation. And so they said, why don't you go start another business? He does that. I'm starting to learn the ropes, using construction grade lasers and laser equipment to help make sure alignment and grading and all that type of stuff is correct. And so I started out learning those ropes, cleaning the equipment. My next phase was supposed to go out and like meet the salespeople, meet the accounts, do that type of thing. And so I was like geared towards business. It was really interesting to me, and it was a chance to like hang out with my dad. Well, then fast forward a couple years, my dad passes away unexpectedly while he's out cycling. And that was that kind of like e-break moment in life where it's like, oh, things are never going to be the same. And a lot like just life experience. You reach kind of those forks in the road where things just take on a different direction. And there's a lot of things when my dad passed away and his business basically dissolved. My mom wasn't able to take it over. They thought they had financial plans in place to perpetuate it and to take care of the family. None of that was in place, even though they'd been told it was. And so I just watched, like, I just got this really nasty taste in my mouth for business and business things. But around that same time, I had an absolute fascination for movement and exercise and those types of things. It was like back in the early days of like bodybuilding.com when you'd surf the forums, and then you just pick a program, wreck a muscle group, pick another program, wreck another muscle group, and so on and so forth. Well, all of that's starting to happen, and then I'm out doing a little bit of. I used to be pretty religious. I was doing a little bit of missionary service, and one day somebody says, "Well, what are you going to do when you go home?" And for whatever reason, I just said physical therapy. I'd never considered it really before, and so it was kind of at that point where I was like, "Well, that makes sense. It's healthcare, it's movement. This sounds great." Well, fast forward, I get into physical therapy school after spending most of my 20s working with adults with developmental disabilities, and I started to realize this is a difficult profession to make any money in, and maybe I could do better if I kind of level up my skills. I get into physical therapy school, forgot my lunch one day, ended up in an advocacy meeting. In the advocacy meeting, they started talking about like begging legislators for money, and like I'm watching my classmates, and it felt like high school pep rally energy where everybody's like, "Oh man, this is awesome! This is great! Let's go do it! We're gonna beat state, or whatever it was." And I was like, "Oh, this is kind of cool energy. I like this, team PT." Well, then I'm sitting back and listening and watching my classmates because I was a little bit older, and I was like, they're getting really excited to talk about something they're in school for. They've never ever even treated a patient, like, and they're gonna go tell like government political people that we need more money. They don't even know why. Like, that's whatever. So I kept showing up for the free lunches. I kept the excitement to be able to help and be on like team PT, but like nothing really resonated from the meetings. And so I was just like, man, there's got to be a way to help. So fast forward, I passed clinicals, pass boards, get a job, do all that stuff. And I'm sitting there and I'm in these patient interviews. And at first, really overwhelmed when I can't turn to my CI and say, what do I do? And, or be able to blame them for whatever else happens or any of those types of stuff. And then once I get kind of past that overwhelm phase, I start to realize like I'm dialed in on patient interview, just the nature of the outpatient clinic I was in. I was kind of in a mill clinic, and they, so I'd be like, oh, I only need whatever objective information to bill insurance. We'll figure out the best plan of care as these people start showing up. I just always kind of had this rolling eval. And what I started to realize is I quit paying attention to the person in front of me, and I would let my mind drift. And my mind would drift towards everything had to do with money and myself. Did my student loans get paid? I have benefits. What the hell does that even mean? How do I get out of this someday? What if I want to start a practice? Like, it was just on and on and on. Do I pay them off fast? Do I pay them off slow? It was just all these financial stuffs. And it like really started to bother and frustrate me because I genuinely like connecting with people and helping them when they're in these difficult, painful situations and states. And so I was kind of reflecting on this. What do they call that? Metacognition. I think that was the $5 word they always used in school. And we're talking about metacognition types of stuffs. And I'm reflecting that with a buddy of mine who's not in physical therapy. And he said a couple of things. He says, Will, quit crying. I'm sick and tired of hearing it. Second, why did you never ask me any questions about this? And then my response was, well, okay, I'll stop crying, but why would I ask you? And he says, well, I'm a financial advisor. Now, mind you, he's one of my best friends, and I had no clue he's a financial advisor. So he's either really bad at marketing or I'm really bad at listening. And I'd imagine it's somewhere a blend of both. But we started talking through some of the stuffs and going over things. And then he just sort of challenged me and he says, I have noticed that I encounter the exact questions that you ask from healthcare providers all over the country. It's really kind of stressful for financial people because healthcare people are so well trained in reasoning, and they come in with somewhat this kind of defensive ego of like, prove it, show it, those types of things, that it makes it difficult to interact with. And they don't trust me because they don't understand money and I don't speak healthcare. What if you kind of bridge the two? And so that's like the long story made as long as possible of how I got into this, because he says, well, when you start to learn this, you should pick up a license so that you're held accountable. He definitely was playing to his audience right there, right? And I said, oh, cool. And so that's how I ended up. And then what I started to realize in financial services is that my favorite part is to provide kind of rudimentary basics education. I don't get excited by, ooh, here's this latest stock tip. I don't get excited by those types of specifics, but a lot like a physical therapist or movement coach of some sort who wants to, help people understand the machine that they're kind of born into and how to get the most out of it. And so I've been doing this now for a number of years, and that's how I ended up in financial services. And I work with clinicians all over the country, business owners, also a lot of people outside of healthcare, to basically know what they need to know so that they can make better and more advanced decisions as they get to it. Chris, I don't even know if I took a breath there.
That was impressive.
Yeah.
I don't even know where to go from there. That's wild.
Well, I was trying to stretch it out, hoping more people would start to trickle in. There are details in that I don't normally share, but
no, I like that.
We are.
Yeah, that's quite a background. Where are you hoping to go from here? Do you want to share your screen? Are you done with the screen because it's Saturday morning? Do you just want to?
Yeah. That was it. All I wanted to do was talk about myself for about 6 or 7 minutes and then hang up. One of the things I'm really curious about is what Q's eating, because whatever's in his mouth, he's giving it the business.
Is it ribs?
Yeah.
No, it is not ribs. I just got back from the gym and I'm stuffing protein bars, so it's actually super not exciting. Tastes like cardboard.
That's actually what I was gonna guess. I was like, that looks like a dry carb protein source of some sort. Like I was like,
how many protein bars are you eating?
4, probably.
It was 2.
Oh, Jesus.
2 for people like him, 4 for normal people. That's how that works. But so anyway, so the big things that I like to, exactly right. Those traps don't run on carbs. It's not a preferred fuel source for carbs. I mean, for traps. But anyway, so the types of things that I think that I talk about most often, when I got into financial services, I was a lot like early career clinicians, where you want to help everybody. At least maybe it's shifting. I don't necessarily know, but you learn these things and you're like, oh my gosh, I can solve anybody's symptoms, situations, etc. And that's what you want to do. What I've started to realize is there are a few key areas that I think are most important, where people, it's not that they need an absolute education on them, but they need to kind of dispel fears so they can take some steps forward. And a lot of times I think the analogy of, I'll spend a lot of time talking about student debt. And then once people get through student debt and they start having questions about, or clinical practice of like, well, can I start a business? Should I start a business? And then when it starts to get more involved in that, I have a team that a lot of times I delegate the deep detail planning, like the invest, where, how, what do we save? Where do we save? Those types of things. But I would say a lot of the types of things that I talk on are the basics. So that's kind of like Chris, you and I were talking. That's what I wanted to go over. And especially with football season, we got preseason afoot, and those types of things. A lot of times I think a nice little primer and refresher is just to get comfortable with terminology. And I like to talk about just kind of the basic players you should have on your financial field. And then once you have those players, then you can start figuring out the strategy based upon the opponents that you're going to face in the given season. Before I jump into that, though, I would have a question for the people here. Are there anything in particular that people are hoping gets covered? And the cool part about having, a half dozen of us on here is you get to tell me exactly what you want to hear.
I might be jumping the gun, but you mentioned it, student loans. I've heard two things: take out the minimum of student loans, but I've also heard take out whatever and put that towards your investment or whatever. That may be a specific question. That was one question I had coming in. But if you could touch on that, that'd be awesome.
Cool. Yeah, we can definitely talk on that. Spinning off of student loans, is there anything else that people want to talk about as it relates to student debts?
Yeah, I think sort of piggybacking on that is, do you, how fast do you pay them off? Obviously, it depends on your interest rate. Like, is refinancing a better option? And I don't know, I guess it's probably more of like a gradient system of how much do you have. But I guess just like more rules of thumb, like on how to pay that off. Like, do you go aggressive early? I guess that kind of depends. I don't know. Maybe you can shine a light there.
Perfect. This is some good kickoff stuff. And then what I'll probably end on is, so my thought would be is to start with the student loan stuffs, because it's pretty top of mind, and then end on maybe some just basic financial stuffs in terms, because I found that it's really hard for people to focus on their financial future when they've got this iceberg of a student loan looming off the port side, right? And people are worried that they're going to run aground like the Titanic. And unlike the Titanic, we've got, better technology. We can kind of see what's going on in the dark. But the other thing that people forget is, like, as scary as the icebergs are, I think it's a lot more frightening to be out in the open ocean with no motor, running out of fuel because you spent all your time worried about the iceberg. And so I say we address the iceberg, kind of chart it, map it, discuss the ins and outs of it, get more familiar and comfortable with it, and then we can focus and think about some other topics. Those are my thoughts based upon the questions. Does that sound good? Cool. So first things first, just think yesterday, if I was paying attention to the timestamps, it became official that student loans are going to continue to be deferred, which is kind of neat, until January. And supposedly it's the final extension. Who knows? So that usually sometimes people have questions on that. I'm going to adjust my screen so I can still see the chat. And then we'll dive into this. Are you guys able to see the Excel sheet? Cool. I always feel like a boomer when I'm like adjusting screens and I kill conversation flow to get everything set up right. It's funny. Anyway, cool. So what'll be helpful with this sheet and what we'll get once we get through the end of it is we'll understand the mechanics of how the loans work. And then we can kind of get into the discussion that'll kind of lend itself to the mechanics of the plans as they currently stand, which will probably change in the next administration or two. But for right now, we're just basing it off of the laws and where we are. What would be helpful for me is, where is everybody in kind of their professional pursuits? Like, where in school, where in practice, those types of things. You can just put it in the chat or come off mute. I don't care either way. Cool. Perfect. That's a nice little, that's almost like if they were parents. That's like how you'd want to like time your children, right? Like second year of school, last year of school, 2 years out of school. It's great. Cool. You came off mute. Were you getting ready to say something?
Yeah, I was just, if we have time at the end, so I'm not that far out of school, but I'm also starting a business. And so, it seems like, on top of just having a lot of student debt, the lenders and everything, one, you're going into more debt to start a business, but it feels like everyone wants you to have, millions of dollars before they trust you to start a business. And so, it just feels like, well, if you just quote unquote work for the man, it becomes difficult to pay off your loans, but then to start a business and become potentially more profitable, it seems like there's some insurmountable hurdles early on. And I know they're not. It just feels that way.
Yeah, what I'll say just objectively from what I've seen, it's kind of objective balance of the objectivity and the anecdotal is the most successful clients that I have are clinician business owners. If we're talking in the healthcare space, who took risks, and all of them had student debt starting. And what they kind of their rough blueprint is they all went on income driven repayments, regardless of what their debt amount was. They didn't refinance it because the problem with refinancing is, first of all, it shows up on your debt sheet. So if you go to borrow money from a bank, they look at it and they're like, well, you have to make that $1,200, $1,300, $2,000 a month payment. Where do you think, where's our money going to come from? But if you're able to show them that your debt obligation, it's like, yeah, I might have a couple $100,000 of student debt, but I also pay $100 a month on it. Then from a utilization perspective, you're a lot less of a risk. Now, it will probably require more personal conversations with banker, especially if you're going to get money. You're going to have to explain to them because they might not understand the landscape of student loans and the mechanics of programs, but you can at least show them that. And I know that rolls over because that's how people with student debt are able to get homes. You show up to a smart mortgage lender and they understand income driven repayment and they'll still give you money there. But one of the cool things about starting a business and having student debt is you can contact your servicer and say, I have student debt. And obviously, because you're calling them, they're going to be like, okay, we got that. And then they're going to say, I'm also not making any money because I just started a business. And they're going to try to get tax information from you. I would just tell them you're not getting paid anything. They're going to ask you to attest to that. So filling out a piece of paper, putting your name on it, signing it and sending it to them. But then a lot of times that'll make your payment on your loan $0 a month. So from a cash flow bridging perspective, that's a great way to help out there is like a little strategy. And I've seen that done by physical therapists and chiropractors who I work with. And that's what they did is they put like investing, they put all these other things that like normies would be doing to attempt to build a business. And they've put all their shoulder into that business. And they feel bad all the time I talk to them. They're like, man, my friends are doing this and that. But also at the same time, I just talked to one of them. He's on track to, between him and his wife, they're chiropractors. So by the end of next year, they're probably going to draw $500,000 a piece from their clinics. Like, why create a choke point of debt and small investing when you can put all that money to grow and to spark a business? And so I don't think that addressed exactly what you're asking about, Q, but those are just some thoughts when you mention that of like ways to work around that. And the other thing that I think about with starting businesses, I just think I've muted most of my social media because, well, it's kind of poisonous, right? I think we all know that. But I did catch a couple headlines and some arguments for and against starting a business early or waiting to develop mastery and all these types of things. And that's funny that they're trying to find silver bullets for that, because that's like the one thing they always tell patients is there are no silver bullets. And that's the first thing they're trying to do with what somebody should do professionally. It's interesting to me. But the next thing is that I've been thinking about this a lot, like starting a business. I think a few things. I think you should fail early, fail often, and fail forward. If I could have given my younger self that advice and kind of explained it, I think I would have accomplished a lot more by this point in my life. And my thought about that is that if you're failing, it means you're trying. And if it's forward, it means you're trying to fail harder, so to speak, in a direction that you want to be. It means you're pushing the envelope. And failing early, I think, is important because you also have less on the line, which means you're also not wasting as much time trying to figure out the perfect way to execute. And kind of a visual, maybe a less aggressive visual of that is like slacklining. Do any of you guys know slacklining or have slacklined? I haven't. I'm not quite shaped for it. That line just sort of touches the ground and the thrill of it doesn't do a whole lot for me. But slacklining, is that fake tightrope walking that's like 18 inches off the ground or whatever. You fall off of that, maybe you roll an ankle, maybe whatever. Like the risk is not as significant. And so if we add in factors of like marriage, children, time, age, all these other things, that line gets pushed higher and higher off the ground until eventually it is a tightrope. And the consequences, it doesn't mean you still shouldn't try to cross it if you're ultimate objective is on the other side, but it's just saying that there's a lot more risk there. And the thing about trying early, failing often on that slack line is you develop a competency, right? And so as things you start to face higher wires, your odds of successfully navigating them increase. So I think that people should start and try businesses. I think they should, find mentorship to kind of fill in some knowledge gaps. And I don't think they should be asking for, $1,200 a session when they still don't know shit. But I do think that they should try. Those are kind of my thoughts on that. And I think one of the things is understanding student debt can help them with the confidence of that, especially if not even just their confidence, because I found that a lot of true entrepreneurs just aren't afraid of the debt anyway, because their bet is on themselves. But it's a lot of times it's the people in their ecosystems of, whether it's a spouse, whether it's parents, whether whoever it is, business partners, etc. And so by being able to intelligently talk about your debt and how it works, all of a sudden it makes them feel more at peace. Even if we know that we're just kind of spinning in circles, you get the buy-in from the people and they're like, okay, cool. And then they can, instead of being doubtful, they can be supportive, if that makes sense. So with the student debt, what I'm going to do is I'm going to show an example of a really clear cut one. I'm going to put in more than the average student loan debt, but I'm going to put this in because it's going to make it easier to delineate between some of the different programs. And I'm just going to use like base wages for different stuff. And then we'll get into some of these other things. And to start, I'm just going to say that we're going to do filing as single and not married, only because of simplicity. It adds a few more layers when we add that in. It's not hard, but if you don't understand the basics, it's easy to get lost. So I'm just going to take like an average PT wage, or I'd say just an average wage, a fair wage for this discussion. We have to know that the federal government assumes there's going to be a 5% income growth every year, year over year, which is whatever. They have to make some assumptions so they can give you some estimates. And then we're going to drop down into this bracket and kind of talk about these graphs. As you can tell, I'm a bit wordy. When do I need to shut up?
You just keep talking. If people have questions, they can just unmute or do the chat.
Or even leave, right? And the next thing I know, like everybody just disappears. Chris's screen goes black. And then
Right.
It's not till 2 hours later that I realize I'm alone.
Yeah. Did you mean like a final time you need to shut up?
Mm-hmm.
It does matter, dude. It's normally like it lasts like 90 minutes, 2 hours. So
All right, cool.
no
Perfect. That works. So going into this, the first thing that you just need to understand is the general breakdown of these plans. So they're done in two ways. One is based on the absolute amount of money. So think of it as a mortgage that you borrowed for the education. And that's these first four plans. So they don't care if you're making $1 million a year, if you're making $1,000 a year, if you're making somewhere in the middle. They don't care. The payments stay the same. And so this math, just like a mortgage, they're able to show you, oh, this is how it maths out and this is what it looks like. And what they're going to give you is timeframes of 10 years to 25 years. Another thing to remember really quickly is that there's no prepayment penalties. So like, unlike other types of traditional loans, if you pay them off early, sometimes there's a penalty for early payoff. Student loans are not that way. If you hear me making comparisons, I'm always comparing it to the standard repayment because that's what the government assumes. So I think of it almost as like our blood pressure benchmark, 120/80. And so for conversational purposes, that's what I'm talking about. I don't really think there's anything special about any of these plans. So I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time talking about them, but just know that this is how, if you don't make any elections and you pay off the way that the government expected, that's what they are expecting. And it's people who are planning and capable of paying these regular monthly payments who more often than not are great candidates for refinancing. But I'm going to talk about that here in a second. But anyway, so these are standard plans. And then the rest of these other three, and then I'll explain these two scenarios at the bottom. These are what we call income-driven repayment. And it's just like it sounds. The repayment is based upon, it's driven by the income. So you make more money, your repayment numbers are higher. You make less money, taxable income, then your payment is lower. And so talking about business ownership and those types of things, when you're not an employee, your taxable income can be very low because essentially everything can be a write-off. And so I know a lot of owners who for years have stayed on as low a payment as possible until they had dependable cash flow and a predictable business. So that's one thing to consider. So what's the trade-off on that? Well, if you're borrowing a couple $100,000 of cash, you don't need to see the assumptions. Also, don't think that I'm like an Excel savant. I did not build this. I built this with somebody who is an educator at a finance department at a university. And the guy actually writes like grants in Excel. He uses Excel as like his word processor, and he has dreams in Excel. Like he told me that to like explain how seriously he takes Excel. So just wanted to make sure the expectations were appropriate. But so you know, on that amount of money, on $200,000 of debt, that's about $1,100, $1,200 of interest every month that you've got to fight against. So if it's $1,200 and your payment is $400, what happens with that $800 gap? What's the trade-off, right? And the trade-off is that that's what accrues, and that's what you have to then catch back up to if your plan is to pay it off. But I think that it's important to understand that, because there is a trade-off of not being able to make these payments, but that's okay, because the whole purpose of, starting a business is to be able to make more money than you would have typically. And that should, in theory, give you the ability to navigate these types of situations. As well, these plans are great because what we'll see when I actually finally stop rambling and get to these numbers, you'll see that sometimes the math makes more sense to stretch it out 20 years than to pay it off as quickly as possible, which is what was asked earlier. Do we pay it off fast? Do we pay it off slow? How do these work? And a lot of that depends on like kind of what your debt to income ratios are in concert with what your professional and like family plans are, because there is a certain extent to which you can do all things. And the last thing you want to do is exhaust yourself trying to make a payment that's unsustainable, if that makes sense. But getting into the mechanics of these, revised pay as you earn is a 25-year plan. It requires you to file married filing jointly if you have a spouse. And the way that they calculate that and why that matters is if you have a spouse who's making money and they don't have any debt, let's say they're making the same money as you and they have no debt, that's going to double your payment. And so if you're trying to budget and get away with paying as little as possible, you might want the option to file separately taxes. And so revised pay as you earn does not afford that flexibility. You have to include your spouse's income. Now, that's also offset by their debt, but just principally, it's a 25-year program. You have to file jointly with your spouse, and it's based off of 10% of your discretionary income. This is a 20-year program. You can file married filing separately if you choose, and it's 10% of your discretionary income. So it's a very subtle difference between those two programs. The pay as you earn offers the most flexibility with how you're going to be able to repay. And I think especially if you plan on being married, I think it's the smartest one to be on if you're going to be leveraging income-driven repayment. Those are my feelings there. And the 10% discretionary income, I think, is important because not really. We'll get into the mechanics of it here in a second. But any questions about those two plans before I get into and kind of show you the math about how they work? Because the goal is to get to the point where you're able to kind of make a rough decision of, should I pay this off fast or should I pay this off slow?
Yep. Yeah. Will, so between those two options, so the repay, it's based over a 25-year plan, and the same rule applies. Like for the green row, if your spouse makes the same amount of money, it would, and you're filing married, it would double your monthly payment.
Yeah. So I'll just show you this. So if your spouse has no debt, so they get no offset there, and let's say they have the same adjusted gross income. It's funny, I said, I'm not going to do this, and then it's exactly what I'm doing. Funny. But you can see what happens with both payments. Both payments come out the same.
Okay.
Because what they're doing is they're including that because the government cares about 10% of your discretionary income is what they call it. and they determine discretionary income with this part of the equation right here, is they say, all right, well, how do we determine what's discretionary in somebody's income? We need a general formula. And they say, let's take their adjusted gross income. Let's subtract 150% of the poverty line because they at least need to be above that. And then we'll just title that, we'll just call that, we'll label that discretionary, meaning like, you get a choice of what you do with it. And so the poverty line is roughly $12,000. So that's about 18 grand is what they're considering as, you deserve and need to have this, which blows my mind. But so that's how that works. So if you have your spouse's income and it's combined into this, now you're basically doubling what that number would be, that adjusted gross income. And that's why the rest of that kind of doubles out. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Thanks.
And so what's nice is with pay as you earn, you can report that money separately. And so you won't get the doubling. So you're still married, still have the family, still doing all this stuff, but you're not having to report their income. And so you're able to maintain this. I see that a lot with people who are going to be on income driven repayment, either for working in a hospital system to get forgiveness, or whose debt to income just makes sense to stretch it out as long as possible. And the way in how that works is you have to start making comparisons with totals. And I think one of the first and best places to start is just start comparing these total amounts. So if you were to pay down this debt for 10 years, how the government anticipated you to pay it, you'd pay in about $277,000. Well, when you see these comparisons, you're like, man, 168 looks really good. And first, that's a plus sign. Well, all right, let's get that right. All right. So we've got basically $100,000 difference here, right? And so on that, all of a sudden, it's like, well, that's a no-brainer to pick the pay as you earn. The problem with that, and where a lot of people have gotten stumble is they say, that doesn't make sense. I wonder how that works. Well, the way that these income-driven repayments are slated is they say, hey, you pay 20 years, and then in 20 years, we're going to write off $307,000, the principal and the accrued interest, right? Does that make sense? Cool. Well, that's the Department of Education. They say, hey, we're good. What does the IRS do? The IRS says, wow, it looks like you just got paid $300,000. And we know that what they like to do is tax people. So they say, we're going to charge you taxes on this 307, which means to get settled up with the government, you owe us about 122 grand. So this isn't a true 108, right? Because we just found out we owe 122. So then we just have to ask ourselves, we have to say, is it worth paying $14,000 a year more over 20 years to free up? What is this number? $1,900 a month potentially. And I think that makes sense, right? If you just look at it in totals, it's like, well, why would I ever pay $14,000 more? Well, when you see that it saves you this much money, you're basically saying, so, all right. So in the end, I end up paying $14,000 more, but it gives me control, decision-making ability over an extra $23,000 a year. A business owner and entrepreneur says, damn, that's my marketing budget. That's equipment. That's, the ability to pay my own bills while I'm starting out. So that's a big deal. So the big takeaway here is that your cash flow matters more than your totals, because this cash flow could then grow. I mean, if you grow your business 10, 20% year over year, now instead of, $65,000 a year, now you're making $180,000, $200,000 a year plus, that's a different decision, right? So you trade off this potential difference to basically buy that, so that's kind of how. Any questions about that? Because that gets really boggy and gets really gray. Or does that make sense? Something to take into account is if you're in a situation, because some people want to go clinical, stay academic, or stay in a hospital system because that's where you're drawn towards. And I think that's great. And you should know and understand the mechanics of these types of plans so you can know, like, man, am I making a huge mistake by doing these types of things? So one of the things to make it even more accurate is to know that you're probably not going to grow in income if you're in that type of a setting, 5% year over year. So we just ran the exact same numbers. I changed it from 5% year over year growth of income to 3, like if you're just getting raises. And now look what happens. Now all of a sudden you end up saving $10,000 in the end. So you end up paying less over 20 years and you get to control $23,000 a year of decision making power. So in that case, if somebody comes to me and they say, well, this is what I'm planning on doing, I would say you should do income driven repayment. I know the idea of carrying your loans for 20 years sucks and it like stings. And, there's this emotional judgment. There's this psychological, man, like there's all these factors. But at the same time, it buys you so much more flexibility. And with that extra money, that extra 23,000, if you're doing a more typical approach to your career, that's where like saving into IRAs comes into play. That's where buying homes comes into play. That's where vacations, that's where trips, that's how that works. But it's important to be just a good steward and to understand that you are going to have an obligation of a tax bill. So you should start preparing for it today. And so, yeah, you've freed up $23,000, but we also should be saving for this tax bill. And so in order to do that, that's an extra $300 a month. That's okay. That's not that big of a deal. Still frees up a lot of cash. And sometimes people get thrown back by saying, well, I owe another bill. Well, think about it this way. You actually have 20 years to prepare for that. Whereas with student loans, a lot of us showed up and we're like, well, shit, this is a lot of money. Like my student loan, I looked at how much a physical therapist made on average. And I think at the time it was like 85 grand. And I just like ran the math on what tuition would cost based upon the school I went to that was estimated. And I just literally divided that number by 85. I was like, oh, that's how long it'll take me to pay off my loans. It's not that big of a deal. I was a grown ass man doing that type of terrible math. You fail to realize, you've got taxes, you've got all these expenses, you've got this extra life stuff. And so the fact that you know ahead of time that this can happen and you have 20 years to prepare for it, I think that's a great deal. It's a solid trade-off. But anyway, any questions or anything that you thought of while I was kind of going through that sort of rant?
I have a question, Will. So based on both those examples, okay, so you're looking at, I guess it'd be a more aggressive growth where you're getting a 5% increase year over year. And then also with the 3%, which is more conservative, like you'd be working, as Q said, for the man. And with both of those models, that income driven model tended to work better. I guess I'm wondering like where the break even would be. Like, so if we had less student debt, instead of that $200,000, like, is there a point at which, say you're crushing it and somehow you only have to take out, or you're super fortunate that you only have to take out, $50,000 rather than $200,000. Does that?
Yeah, great question. So in those types of situations, yeah, that does change things. So like, I think this is important for people who, I think the average PT school debt falls somewhere between $100,000 and $130,000. But a lot of times when I'm talking to people and I see people, and a lot of people who are entrepreneurial, the number is higher. And especially if we're incorporating other professions, like most of the chiropractic students who I talk to and chiropractors would be like, damn, I would have loved to have gotten out of school with $100,000 of debt. It's not uncommon to see $200,000-$300,000 there. So they need to really understand the mechanics of these types of programs, because it's what's going to afford them the ability for like to feel any hope for the future. Now, when you're talking about smaller lending amounts and you're talking about really kind of, if you're kind of at this 1-to-1 debt to income ratio, where, your first year's salary is going to be roughly what you took out loans, well, then the chances of you using income driven repayment for 20 years is basically zero, because the math just flips and it doesn't make sense to stretch it. The only reason I would even consider stretching it is if you're like aggressively trying to grow a business and you're like, I need every free dollar for whatever it takes to grow my business, well then yeah, maybe you elect one of these plans for a year or two, but ultimately you'll need to know that you are going to pay that back. And it's in those situations, once cash flow is steady and it's trending in the direction that you would like, that's when I think starting to get aggressive in one direction or the other makes a lot of sense. So in that situation, if somebody's coming out with $50,000 of debt, I'm only telling them to consider income driven repayment if they're trying to stabilize their income, like they're right out of school or they're getting ready to job transition and they would just rather hold cash than pay it away. But you also have to know that if you've got, let's call it $75,000 worth of debt, like your monthly payments are, $800. You can push them out and make them a lot less. That's a lot different than $2,000 a month. So you just got to kind of figure that out. And then when people are considering aggressive payoff, I'm of the mindset, people say, do I invest or do I pay my debt? That's usually the next question that people ask. I think if you're going to like just with extreme amount of aggression, pay off your debt, and I would say that's less than 3 years, then I wouldn't, I'm kind of okay with that. And somebody not putting money away in lieu of paying down debt or in lieu of investing, paying down debt, that's kind of where I would consider that type of all in. But if people going in all in still stretches it 7, 8, 9, 10 years, they should be on an income driven repayment plan, which means never in a million years should you refinance. As much rambling and as many non sequiturs as I've uttered in the last 45 minutes, something that shouldn't be mistaken is that don't allow your interest rate to make your decision on whether or not you pay back your student debt. What happens is people see that, they refinance because they want a better interest rate, and then they message me or somebody like me and they say, hey, how does this income driven repayment stuff work? And I have to tell them, well, you can't participate in it. Well, what if the government writes off debt? It doesn't matter. Your debt's private now. Well, what do you mean? What about public service loan forgiveness? Doesn't work. That's only federal debt. Even though the federal debt interest rates are not the best, you'll never get more protection and safety than you will with the federal system, because there's this law of large numbers. Like there's millions of borrowers who, if they're going to make it, if the government makes the decision, it's not just to impact you, it's going to impact so many people. So I'm of the mindset till you know exactly what you want, until your cash flow is stable. And if all of your debt is federal debt, keep it federal debt. Refinancing makes sense where, let's say, like Q used the example of starting a business earlier. Let's say, all right, so for the first couple of years, we don't put a lot towards the debt because we got to get the business starts to stabilize. We've got a year or two of profits. We're just like, all right, things are trending well. Then maybe we consider refinancing that debt because there's enough income to be able to satisfy that. Now we want a lower interest rate because we don't need the federal forgivenesses quite the same way. But don't look to refinance to solve the problem. It should never make the decision for you. You should know before you pay back. You should know whether or not you're paying back fast or slow before you consider refinancing. What's the exception to that? If you already have private debt, which a lot of people in schools have, and your interest rates are above 6%, you should probably just go ahead and refinance that once you start working or you are working to get a lower interest rate. Because just to give you an example, but also to show you, like, let's just kind of equalize this. So we're going to compare the gray line, the top line, and the bottom line, the refinance line. So let's say you get like a radical rate of like 3.75% on a refinance, and you have 6.9 on the standard payment. Your payment difference is about $120 a month, which, I mean, if somebody gave me an extra $120, I'd want it, but it's also not like the decision maker, it's not like the ultimate, I should absolutely do this. It just makes it more efficient. And in the end, what does that save you? 14 grand? Of course, I'd rather have $14,000, but at the potential risk of losing federal protections, I don't think it's worth $14,000. But again, if you have the private debt, it's a no-brainer. You're going to have to pay the money back anyway. You might as well get it more efficient. That kind of answers some of your questions, Kevin, that you were kind of
Yeah, that definitely does. Thanks.
cool. Oh, I'm going to dig into these. So I think the rules of thumbs are difficult, but I would say the closer you are to 1-to-1 debt to income ratio or better, you just need to know and accept you're going to end up paying back all your debt. The closer you drift to that 2-to-1 or more, you have a defensible argument to use income driven repayment. So it just kind of like helps at least point you in the right direction, right? It's like squatting. When, if I hurt all the time and squatting makes it worse, maybe we kind of steer a different direction or we find a different movement for right now. Doesn't mean squats are bad, just means not right now. So then the question is, how much do I borrow for those who are in school? This is recorded, but this isn't sanctioned. This isn't any of those types of things. And I am talking as peer to peer, friend to friend, not financial advisor to people. In case somebody wants to soundbite this. If you got caught taking out maximum amount of loans and investing, you would get fined significantly. It's technically illegal. You agree to that when you go to borrow the money. That said, I know plenty of people who, I know a guy who didn't want to make a car payment and he had a wife and kids and they needed a new vehicle. So they just borrowed more student loan money. And they're like, well, that's easier than this. And I do know people who've taken out money and have invested it. And it is a real hustle and grind way to do things. Like it's scrappy, that's for sure. But it's also technically illegal. And if you were in school and you got caught doing that, and the government's got all kinds of, eyes and fingers and whatnots, that would be a really unfortunate way to get booted from school or having to find other ways to fund. So as far as that, I'm more of the mindset of, and what you choose to do is totally up to you. I think about the ethical, clinical comparable for me is somebody asked me about PEDs and things like that. I'm not quick to vilify them, but I'm also not quick to recommend them. But it doesn't mean it couldn't help somebody. So it's like make your own decision, but I can't prescribe it if that makes sense. So those are my thoughts there. Now, as far as strategies in school, I think figuring out a way to borrow as little as possible if you're not going to kind of go a gray area route, I think makes a lot of sense, mainly because it's going to add flexibilities going down the road and long term. And I think there are a number of ways to do that. I don't know that this is, sometimes I end up in these chats and it's all business and how do we hustle, and I don't really get that vibe necessarily from this, so I won't get into all the like ways people are trying to make money. But I would say if you could figure out a way to generate income while in school, whether it's learning how to coach clients, coaching clients, etc., to offset your student loan borrowing, I think that would be great. I think writing out your budget and kind of returning money that you don't need to the servicer is not a bad idea. Because while you're in school, you can always borrow more money. But those are kind of my thoughts on how much do I borrow. Less is better unless you're very confident in gray dealings. I will say I made some pretty, hazardous purchases with my own student loan money while in school, but this is not a confessional, so I don't necessarily need to go into them. But any other follow-up questions to any of those types of things, or where we should dovetail off of that? All right. Also, for those of you who are still in school, if you want me to talk to your school, let me know. Like I give presentations too. I'm a lot more formal, and we do use a PowerPoint because ivory towers and such prefer it. So let me know, and I can do that. It's not a problem. And has a lot more direction than kind of the ramblings today. But those are some of my thoughts on the mechanics of those programs and how they work. And if you really want to peel back the curtain and get a little bit more confidence, and especially if you're in the business situation or you're thinking about using income driven repayment, never mind. I'm not going to derail into that. Any follow-up questions to the student loan stuff? You anything more in depth as it relates to loans and business?
No, I mean, some of the key takeaways so far, it just seems that, there are ways to at least make cash available early on for yourself to get the business rolling. Like, you don't have this massive amount of payment due immediately. Of course, it doesn't just go away, but on the front end of things, because like I think I'm of the mindset where we're at right now, where it's like, dude, I just need enough cash to get going, and once it's going, like, we're gonna fucking crush it. Just
Yeah.
let's get started. But you can't really get started if you're looking for cash flow and then you have a 2 grand payment. If only thing you do is look at it from some of these first payment plans where it's like, well, you owe us $1,900 a month. That's the flat rate. That's it. So starting in January, when the loan forgiveness or the loan deferment kind of thing is gone, then it's like, boom, we're starting. So you better have a successful business rolling by then. This at least allows me to think, okay, I can free up some cash with the understanding that, yeah, things are going to be put on a little bit further back. Maybe you accrue some more interest, but that's a trade-off. You're trading off the risks of, yeah, I'm going to probably have to pay a little bit more later, but I'm also going to have a little bit more later because I'm taking this risk now. So at least it seems like there's some things that can be shifted and moved as long as you kind of know the mechanics in it. And I think, I don't know, it would take some, I think it would take some time for me to personally look at what I am specifically dealing with, and then, come to folks like you and work some of those numbers back and forth, because there's going to be a big learning curve, right? Like you talked about this on your podcast with E3 too, that it's like, you spend so much time learning in the clinic, all of these clinical things, all these clinical tests, what to do, the nuances of having conversations. I mean, everything that we do in the CalU community and like through this journal club has been very clinically minded. Then all of a sudden you get spat out into this business world. You're like, what the fuck, dude? Like, I had no idea how any of this works. I have no clue how to talk with lenders, no clue how the SBA situation works, no clue how any of these like mechanics move, which is sad. It's a sad thing for our profession. But yeah, I think where we're at, I think we're struggling to ask a lot of questions because this is all so new for us. Like, it would be, somebody that has a marketing degree just getting spit into like a chiropractic class and being like, hey guys, you have questions? They're like, fuck, I don't even know what a nerve root is. Like, what the hell did you guys like, okay. So there's these little projections coming out of the spine that send signals. Cool. First time I've heard that.
Yeah, that's so funny you use that, because that's what I talk about when I'm going over this, and there's like 50 little squares on the Zoom. I watch people's faces go. And it just reminds me like the first time you learn about ascending and descending pathways. And it was just like electric spaghetti. That's like how I explain it to them. Like the first time you see it, you're like, I guess this is true. Like and then, you repetition. And what's interesting is like when I first got into this, I always wanted to give the right and the best absolute answer. And, you put just way too much sauce on it, so to speak. And it's like, sure, some people will get it first pass, but it's just like squatting. It's like, well, is that rep perfect? No, but you're going to do a lot more of them over time. So it's good enough. Just keep doing it. Just keep showing up. And that's what these types of things are. So like the people who show up, there's a lot of repetitions that are taking place in an hour, and just keep using the term. And eventually it's going to be really easy and interchangeable. But I think you're absolutely right. And the other thing that's really difficult about starting a business in the healthcare stuffs is you also have so many people selling so many courses and telling you so much stuff is important. And it's just like, maybe, like, I don't know. And at some point you just have to trust one of them, and you hope it works out, and you hope these types of things. But there are good books like this book written by this fella named Mike Michalowicz, which it's kind of this pretty strange alliteration of sorts, but like he's talking about basic systems that work across healthcare, not healthcare, but just business in general, like how to create accounts, how to like set things up, how to like kind of slowly, orient stuff. Then there are other things. There are a couple groups that are forming, and people are slowly where they're, talking about business finances and doing some of those things. But even just little books and reads like that can help out. And then the other thing to know is like how little legal ramification, because that's what a lot of it is as well. It's like, well, what's my risk? What's going to happen? Am I going to lose everything? And we spend so much time with inaction. I know that I have personally, that you look back and you're like, damn, I would have rather had those 5 years and figured out how to dig my way out of a hole than to still be at the same starting spot. Um, anyway, yeah, I would agree. We're just not really given that good of education. And I think, I don't know if the organization is still around, but there used to, at least locally, the SBA used to have this. I think it was SBA. Yeah, here it is. A lot of times different towns, especially the larger the city is, they'll have something, they'll have basically these small business groups. And usually it's retired entrepreneurs and business owners who give their time to basically answer general business questions and to help with stuff. And those are also the people where I remember I met with before I went to PT school. So it was quite a while, it was a while ago, where I was trying to like figure things out, and I set up an appointment with somebody. The guy was a business owner, talked to him about it. He just started asking me basic questions and it like just kind of pointed me in the right direction. I ended up not having any interest in it. You know, it was like an e-commerce type of a business, but like these types of non-healthcare resources, it's really important. Scott Morrison always used to tell me that, like he and I are buddies and we'd banter a lot and bitch about a lot of things. And one of the things he told me that he wishes he saw more rehab professionals do is get outside the profession, you know, develop unrelated hobbies and interests and relationships, not related to healthcare, because you just start to think that the only world that exists is right here. Because I mean, Q, I know a ton of people who just do radically creative fundraising types of stuff. But in PT, if you're talking to healthcare business owners, it's like, here are the 3 ways you raise money. And then you get outside of it and it's like, I mean, who knows? You could crowdfund your business, you know, get people excited and build it for, like, there's a local brewery who the whole reason they exist here is they got enough people to like, they say buy a beer, buy a share. So you buy a share in their company and you get a beer. And that's like kind of one of their ways of crowdfunding. And like, you don't hear people talking about that. So maybe it's, I don't know how that translates to PT. Maybe it's buy a roll of KT tape. I'm kidding. Whatever. But yeah, exactly right. 1 squat per share. But anyway, I think like looking for resources outside of healthcare, I think in a lot of times we in healthcare like to make things more complicated than they really need to be. And so you might check in and just ping if you have a local, you know, SBA organization and talk to them. Because maybe Q, you show up and you say, hey, here's who I am. Here's what I'm looking to do. Here are these types of things. Here's my thoughts. And maybe that person gets excited and they're like, I don't know shit about healthcare, but I really like what you're telling me. Let me connect you with some people around town. You know, and next thing you know, maybe you've got people throwing you cash to do this thing. You know, you sell the belief. But if you're only ever talking to the same people, sometimes it's hard to get out of it. But those are kind of my thoughts on that ramble.
Hey, well, I got a quick question that just popped up. Is that all right?
Yeah, I'm literally only here for you guys, so feel free to interrupt.
Yeah, so like life happens and like you don't plan on having a family, or you get this like huge raise and all of a sudden you're making like way more money than you ever thought. Are there any situations or ramifications of like switching from like an income base to like your standard? Say like you're kind of close and you got this raise and you're like, ooh, I could really pay this off really quickly if I just do that? Or do you suggest once you pick something, stick with it kind of with whatever happens?
Yeah, and I think the like healthcare correlate is, do you ever adjust somebody's plan of care based upon a new presentation? Right? And the answer would be yes. But you want to make sure that you're not, you know, jumping the shark on that, and that you're, you know, getting ahead of yourself. So that can totally happen. And that's what my hope is for people who start businesses, who start out on income driven repayment. Hope one day they look in their business account and they're like, damn, where did $390,000 come from? It's in my business account, you know, paying bills, doing what we want to do, but this is what's just in the business account. Huh? What do I do with it? You know, then you get to make cool decisions. Then you get to decide, I could carve this off for the loans and be done with these people, or I could do something else with it. I've found student loan repayment decisions are harder when you have less. The people who start to make the money, then like I've got a couple clients who have done exactly that. Well, here's your balances with, you know, me and my team. It's enough to just write a check and be done with your loans. Do you want to do that? Most of them say, hell no. Hell no. This is great. I have money now. I never thought I'd have money before. Like, people always want to get rid of debt when they have no assets. And so as you start to accumulate assets, the debt feels less significant, right? I mean, one of the sayings I remember, well, look at all the strong men. None of those guys should be walking around the size they are, but they don't mind doing it because they're moving big shit, you know? And so it's kind of similar with this. It's like, I don't care about the debt because I've got the strength to carry it. But right now, it's like you're standing in front of that giant tire or those logs or the barrels or the whatever they're picking up and moving. And it's like, I don't have the ass literally to move this. And so as you start to adapt and as you start to grow and as you start to take chances, you know that you're going to start to run into that thing and it's going to start to move and you're going to learn form to be able to do it. So just to validate kind of your thought process, Jordan, it's totally possible to redirect and to change. When it's not okay to change is when it's people's emotions are driving them. When they don't have the objective information to support their decision and change that. For example, I have a client who it's almost like clockwork. When I first started working with them, newspaper headline would come out that says public service loan system is not going to work. It's whatever. I almost knew like within hours of when I was going to get an email or a phone call from this person. And then we'd have the call off the ledge and they'd say, okay. And it was just over and over. And then finally I said, all right, well, you're telling me that you can afford an extra $1,400 a month payment towards your loans. That's what you're saying you can do. How about you just save that in an account that you're not going to touch? Do that for 6 months. And if life doesn't change for you and it's still possible, then maybe we switch to paying it all off. But until you can show me that you can actually do that, like what's the point in changing the plan? And I talked to that person. I had to call him up for something unrelated, maybe 8 weeks after that. I said, hey, how's the savings coming? You should have probably, I don't know, you should have, I don't know, right around $3,500. I was just at pause. Couldn't do it, could you? Nope. Yeah, you were right. You know, so if it's the emotion trying to redirect, that's a problem. But if you have the data that says, damn, all this cash here, debt here, then I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I just want people to think about the decision, right? Sure, go for a PR when you've kind of been trending that way, not just because you feel really good one day. I mean, who am I to say? YOLO, right? But any other questions as it relates to student loans and student loan stuffs? If not, I'm going to get into some of this, like how ugly is the green on this play chart? Isn't it horrendous? It's really bad. It's like old school artificial turf. I remember when I first ever played on a turf field and I was like, wow. So this is what they think grass looks like. But it's a lot better now. But anyway, I think this is important because sometimes people are like, do I save? Do I invest? Do I get in real estate? Is it crypto? Do I buy this insurance? Do I buy that insurance? Do I do all these things? Do I put all my money in this stock? Is it only in, like, it's just over and over and over. And kind of like what he was saying, like you hear all these things and it's like, what the hell do you do? Well, I think understanding what you should do first to, again, allow you to make better decisions, right? Give yourself a good foundation. First and foremost, you need to understand who you are on the field. And every one of you is the quarterback, meaning you're driving, you're play calling, you know, you're kind of directing everything. And anybody like myself, coach, mentor, etc., well, I gave it away because I wasn't thinking as I wrote. But that all these people are off the field. None of them are on the field making the decisions. They're there to give education, but it's up to you to decide on how to execute. It's just important to remind that they'll remind you they're never going to make the decision. They shouldn't make the decision for you. They should give you the information and you should make your best decision. Next thing is important is as the quarterback, for you to have time in the pocket to be able to make the decisions, you need to have a line, right? And so how do you create the line financially? What are the types of things that you can do? Well, first things first, you got to get the ball started. And I think this center, I think of this as your emergency fund. And this can be really objective, right? I would say 3 to 6 months of your bottom line's expenses, which means you need to track your money enough to know what you actually need. And then you just multiply that by 3 to 6. If you lean more conservative, I would lean 6. If otherwise, I would say 3. And I would say, especially if you have kids and a mortgage and those types of things, you want to make sure you just absolutely have that cash. And I would say you just hold that in a savings account and a checking account. Eventually, as things evolve, you can get fancier on where you hold that money. But I would say to start, and especially based upon when we pulled the the room, the Zoom chat, the journal club, I would say cash is perfectly fine to hold it in. Next thing you need is you need your guard solutions. These are like healthcare.
So real quick, 3 to 6 times what exactly? You said like
Your monthly expenses. So
okay.
so if you need $5,000 a month, if that's what you need to make life work, then you would need 15 grand. And we'll talk about how much cash you should hold after, but we're just getting the players on the field first. I appreciate that hop in. So anyway, so then you need like these other solutions, you know. So that's cash and just day to day. You need these. You need to make sure you have a healthcare solution. Because if you don't, that can become very costly. Sure, the odds for what I can perceive, most of the people in here being healthy, chances are nothing was going to happen to you, but the what if could be catastrophic, right? Just started working with a client who's like early 40s, breast cancer. Who would have guessed? Healthy, active. You just don't know these things. And so a healthcare solution I think is important. There's different ways to do that. Especially as a business owner, it gets a little bit stressful for sure. And as you add kids, but healthcare solution. And then you need to make sure these other supplemental insurances are in check. Your auto insurances, renters insurances, those types of things, homeowners insurances. Again, because if something big happens, it becomes catastrophic. And then the other thing, then we'll move out here to the right tackle and the tight end. On this side of the ball, especially if you have people dependent on you, having a solution for death, a premature death, is kind of what can be captured by these two. I include the tight end not because I'm an idiot, but because there are life insurance policies, and that's what we're talking about here. This is life insurance. There are policies that can be offensive, meaning they can be an asset, not just something there in case somebody dies. And when I define asset, it could be somewhere to hold safe cash. So there are certain policies where you can effectively warehouse money. The money never goes backwards if the market drops. It grows better than a savings account, and you can access it whenever you want. It's more expensive, but it's an offensive tool potentially. So that's why I include the tight end. And just like the tight end on the field, it can be an offensive star, will never be your only star, but works really well in concert with the rest of the team, and is also capable of putting up a block if needed, you know. And so these two basic types of insurance are term insurance, which is really cheap, and we'll call it permanent life insurance, meaning as long as you're paying it, it lasts forever. Term meaning it lasts for the term that it's set up for, 10, 20, 30 years, etc. Whereas permanent life insurance is, you know, if you live till 90, it's still in force. Does that make sense? Cool. But now look, we're starting to build out the line. Then I assume most people in here have seen the movie The Blind Side with Sandra Bullock. I know it's about Michael Orr, but Sandra Bullock just did something for me in that flick. Anyway, so the whole purpose of this is the blind side, right? It's the hit you can't see that takes you off the field. And I think that this, we would call that a disability. And if you've heard me speak in any podcast, I almost always bring up disability because these are the types of things where it's like, you see every GoFundMe starts this way almost. We never could have planned for this. We never could have prepared for this. It's like, oh no, you could have, you know. I'm not blaming, and that's not me being heartless towards the people, but you have a lot more autonomy in kind of watching out for yourself and those who are dependent upon you than a lot of people would want to believe. What they're really saying is we didn't want to spend the money on this, or potentially they were ignorant and didn't know they could solve for it. But think about this. This is disability insurance. And if you're employed, you might get short-term and long-term disability from your employer. It's kind of funny when they say you get an STD from your employer. Never thought of it that way, and you shouldn't, unless you're married to your employer or in a relationship, you shouldn't do that. That could get you into trouble. But with the disability insurance, there's typically two kinds. There's a short-term and there's a long-term. Short-term is great if it's free, because It's like, okay, if I get sick or hurt, that'll cover me for a few months and it doesn't cost me anything. Otherwise, that's what your emergency fund is for. You can just tap into that and pay for it. And the reason why I say that is the cost on a monthly basis for short-term disability is pretty high. Now, I also think it makes a lot of sense for women who are maybe in childbearing years, because if pregnancy disables them in some capacity, these policies can cover it sometimes. So, but with the long term, this is saying something happens and you might go back to work, you might not go back to work. So it could be mental health related. I have a client who was out on disability for 2 years because they just had like a total breakdown, couldn't handle their clinical work, and they went back and got retrained. I've had somebody, like I said, cancer related, could be musculoskeletal. I have a client right now got in a motor vehicle accident at the beginning of the year and they're still not back to a full caseload. That's a problem, when you're banking on those types of things. And so long-term disability, a lot of times an employer will give you 60% of it, but that still leaves a gap. If you're going to be self-employed, this is going to be an expense that you shoulder. And something to know is that until you have about a year or two's worth of income, it's going to be difficult to get. Not impossible to get. There's some loopholes, but it's going to be difficult to get because just like you were saying, people are like, well, we're not going to give you money. We don't know who you are. Similarly, these insurance companies are like, we're not going to protect you for, who knows how. We don't want to write you a $5,000, $6,000, $7,000, $8,000 check until you're 70. We don't even know you, but there are ways to kind of get around that, which we can talk about. But you can see what we just built out is we built out your line. And if you know the common thread, every single one of those minus the center ended in the word insurance. It's big, it's ugly, and it's rarely who you talk about when you're at the bar, but they're the people who are there and let you know, they create the safety so that you can kind of run the offense as the quarterback. So we've got those things in place. And that's a lot of times where you end up when you're starting a business and you just feel like the business owner, you're just scrambling, right? Don't have anybody or anything to pass to. And so once you start building out and creating stability, then you can start looking into like your asset accumulation vehicles, like what's going to grow money or grow assets. In an employee sense and situation, these are going to be traditionally 401ks and 403bs. And then also this is where you have IRAs. Now, whatever, not a writer. I'll talk that out. But 401ks and 403bs are going to be employer sponsored. And the reason you participate in these is because they're going to give you a match, meaning whatever effort you put in, they're going to give you a percentage of that effort. So you get a little bit of help from that. So I typically put those as it's kind of a running back, right? You kind of get the fullback to help you out, create the way. IRAs is an individual retirement account. So that's stuff you do on your own, separate of your employer. No matching contributions. Roth versus traditional. Anytime you see this attached to an account, it means that you're paying taxes today and then never in the future. There's a lot of value in no tax in the future because I don't know what tax laws look like in 2045. I don't know if every one of you is going to be in a just a radical tax bracket and you're gonna be like, shit, wish I had some money that I wasn't getting taxed on when I needed it. Traditional is nice though because it decreases your taxable income today and then you pay taxes on it when you go to use it in the future. So the big thing to think about is these are qualified plans, meaning they qualify for tax benefits. Wide receivers, these are like, think of these things, this would be like real estate, other speculative stuffs. Like this is where people start talking about like NFTs and crypto. And I've got a client who actually invests in whiskey. He makes probably $5,000-$6,000 a year trading bourbon. I think that's kind of cool, right? Catch a buzz and some neat bottles. But, that's kind of where those work. And you can see that these different positions, now you've kind of got them all tagged in. Now you can figure out what you want your strategy to be and where you invest in the players next. Because if you want to play a pass heavy offense, right? And you want to then you need to figure out how to cash flow, better receivers. If you're spending, if you tell me I want better receivers, but you're putting all your money into your running backs, then that's kind of a mixed message, right? That's kind of so figuring out and just understanding these things, I think, is important. But these are like the basic instruments and levers that you pull to be able to kind of create your cash reserve and retirement income. Don't worry, I'm not going to like dig into an analogy with all of these, but just know that these are all offensive things and their whole purpose is to generate a cash reserve. And look what comes before all of it. You got to be able to fund it. So that's why I'm really strong proponent of, if you want a business idea and you want to try to grow it, start it early. Figure that out. Figure out where you can put all your effort into. And if you try to put your shoulder into being a business owner and you're like, I don't like this, there's nothing wrong with that. But at least you figured that out sooner so that you could allow time to kind of multiply your efforts in these other areas. But any questions about the play chart?
From a timing perspective, do you recommend all of the insurance to be created all at once?
Yeah, I think a lot of that depends on cash flow and cash flow availability. I think at least having a defensible answer for all of these positions is important. I don't necessarily think they all have to happen at once. I think if I was going to prioritize things, I think an emergency fund is within your control. So I think like the emergency fund, I think is really important. I'd put that high. I would say having a disability solution is really important. And if you have dependents, like if you've got kids, then I would say life insurance kind of dovetails right behind it. And I would think most people kind of concurrently have a health care solution in place or are working on it. So they kind of, I would say it's kind of in like the same general time frame. I wouldn't say year 1 you do this, year 3 you do this. I would say that those are kind of, you should have solutions for those, or at least be thinking about them kind of concurrently, because their whole their purpose is largely the same, to kind of prevent your life from like a catastrophic failure in one way or the other. I would say the most difficult ones to solve for are probably healthcare and disability. You can always save cash, so emergency fund is not that difficult. And life insurance, especially term insurance, is real cheap. But those are my thoughts there. Any follow-ups to that? I'll say, like, one of the things I mentioned to work around for the long-term disability, they'll write certain contracts based upon your profession, so you can get them without having to show and proof income. So if you're within your first couple years of graduating, a lot of the top tier companies will say, well, Q, I don't know, you're a physical therapist, data says you'll make this. Well, we can't give you what you're making right now because you can't prove it yet taxable wise, like haven't been going long enough, like pick an arbitrary number. But what we can give you is a baseline of like $3,000 a month is kind of the contract we could write for you, where if you got hurt, we could give you that. And I think that's a lot better than zero. It's not great if you're making $10,000, $12,000, $20,000 a month, but at least it's like something. It's kind of a baseline threshold, and you can do that. They usually call them like beginning professional limits types of contracts. If you're transitioning, so let's say you're like 4 or 5 years into clinical practice and you want to transition into business, a lot of times, as long as you're transitioning into a healthcare business, a lot of times those companies will give you, again, like a percentage of what your prior income was, not what your full current is, until you can show them taxable documents like, hey, I've got this business, we're pulling in this, we're doing this. So that can kind of like help for it. But I just think like, and I would argue it's more important to protect your disabled self than your dead self. Like, if you're here and broken, you can get really expensive to the people who are taking care of you. But I also have a strong bias to the life insurance. My dad was a business owner, dropped dead. They thought it was in force. It wasn't. My mom lost the business, had to pick up a job like as a high school secretary, just to make sure we had healthcare benefits. It was just awful to kind of watch everything fall apart. So those are kind of my thoughts there. Follow-up questions, follow-up thoughts, things we want to know more about. Go ahead, Peter.
Yeah, sorry. Well, just following up on the short-term versus long-term disability, from my understanding, the short-term is like for like less than a year. Long-term is more for like if there's a chronic disability. For someone who's like a new grad practicing, would you recommend more so like the short-term, or does the employer cover it? Sorry, I wasn't really too sure about that.
Yeah, no, and that was a great question. I should be more clear on that. Generally, most short-term disabilities will last. They usually kick in like 2-3 weeks after the disability. So like if you broke your arm, you could submit your claim like day 14, and then they'd start kicking you a check. Usually those stop in 90 days, anywhere from 3 to 6 months. Those stop. That's as long as those plans cover. Most of them, unless sometimes I see like in hospital organizations, they'll push out to like 6 or 9 months of short-term disability coverage. But on these coverages, even if it's 6 months, you can save that cash. It'd be inconvenient, but it wouldn't be as detrimental. Whereas what long-term disability typically does is it starts at 3 months, so at 90 days, and then could cover you indefinitely. Or like that client I was telling you about who just had a mental breakdown and couldn't practice for a year and a half, 2 years. They paid her a check for that period of time till she could retrain and find a new job. If all she had was short-term disability, she would have been left like in a pretty rough spot. Did that clear it up for you, Peter?
Yeah, yes, it did. Thank you.
Cool.
Will, kind of going on with like the idea of failing early, fast, frequently. Obviously, you're maybe not talking about like, oh, I tried out, this insurance. Like, what are you talking like business idea there? Like, I don't
Yeah, what do I
necessarily.
mean by failure?
Yep.
I think if you have ideas of things you want to try and do differently, like let's say it's even, well, I think I want to work with athletes. All right, get in front of athletes, work hard with athletes. All of a sudden, you'll find out very quickly whether or not you want to work with athletes instead of wondering, what if I worked with athletes? I think I want to work with, I don't know, pick something else. I think I want to support physicians and helping them be healthier. Try to get in front of them and do that. Or, hey, I want to build a business. I think I want it to be online. All right, push into the online space. Try it. Give it a rip. I think those are the types of things that I mean early and often. Things that you're like nervous about, those are the types of things that I would try. Because you can figure out if like that stokes, because it could be hard and challenging, but it could still be really exciting. Like, man, this sucks. I'm getting beat up, but man, it's fun. Or you're wondering if, and you spend all this mental energy wondering if you could work with athletes. And then finally, 3-4 years into your career, 5 years into your career, you get a chance and you realize these people are whiny bitches and I don't want to treat a single one of them ever. Then you just wasted all this bandwidth that you could have been spending on something else. Maybe you go to work with athletes and you say, you know what, I want to end up in pediatrics. Like, let's look at Derek Miles, right? That's a really good example. Gets into the research and the development, and then all of a sudden, like, real hard pivot into this like youth sports, because that's where you can have significant impact early. And we're not meeting, certain health standards and physical activity standards. And so like somebody who, early on and trained probably wanted to work with different people. He worked in the acute care setting for a while. I was like, all right, this is fine. Got into outpatient orthopedics and then got the job over at Stanford and realized and got dug into the research and was like, you know what? Really, youth activity stuff. That's what I want to get into. And that's where, a lot of his emerging stuff comes out of. Sure, he does a lot of cooking with adhesions and those types of things, but that's because he likes to start shit and cook. But like, those are the types of things where I mean, fail forward, push.
Yeah, that's helpful because I didn't know if it like related to like the playbook here, because then I was like, then that kind of seems like if you dabbled in like different types of like insurance policies or anything like that, like that could get really expensive real fast and kind of a waste of time.
Yeah, what I would say as it relates to the playbook, I would say the fail forward, fail early, fail often is more philosophical types of stuff and way to like live. It's strategy. It's not necessarily kind of this pragmatic stuff of, all right, all of these ideas are great and all of these things are fine, but real world, what do I need to do to kind of watch out for me and mine? And so I would say fail forward early often is more of like professional pursuit than those types of things financially. Um, hopefully that delineates it a little bit, because you're right. A lot of different kinds of insurance policies, like, yeah. What other stuffs? What else we got? What other questions or thoughts?
So for those kind of, your front line of protection, something that I'm thinking about right now is we're more in the stage of like we're trying to get things off the ground. So every dollar that comes in, we are 100% putting that towards something like an SBA loan infusion to get more to start our business, right? So like paying for different kinds of insurance, having the emergency fund, like after going through school with soon to be 3 kids, that wasn't like, that's not a possibility. Like we don't have any family to support us at all. You know what I mean? Financially. So like having say, okay, so obviously with government help and friends that were here with like free housing, whatever situation might somebody come across, you might have the ability to survive on a pretty cheap budget per month. But even that being said, to get a business started, you might be putting in every dime that you have to like a cash infusion from an SBA loan. So,
Yeah.
I mean, what's an acceptable amount of time then that you could kind of be in this risky zone? And I know that's a super nebulous question because it's like, how are you supposed to answer that question? Like, I don't know, 3 months, 1 month. But I mean, from your experience and what have you seen, is that just something that's like a non-negotiable that you need that front line at all times, regardless of whether you're starting, or is that something that you're saying, hey, you know what? You're taking a risk here. You might be able to put off, getting your front line until, you put the team on the field with your business.
I would say if you have kids, it's a non-negotiable to have solutions for healthcare. They might not be ideal ones. Like they might not be perfect. They might not be, the best health insurance plan. They might not be the best stuff. But even if you're not drawing income, well, then look to state plans, right? At least make sure you get the kids covered. I would say it's especially with young children. If your kids are older and they can fend for themselves, fine. But if it's young children, I think it's pretty cheap to get term life insurance. I mean, and something is better than nothing. Like $10 a month, even if it gets you $200,000-300,000 of life insurance. I think the surviving spouse would much rather. Obviously, you not being there is like, man, that's the worst. But also at the same time, being able to at least have some sort of a buffer to find a solution is better than, wow, cool, just put Q in the ground. It was because of all the protein bars, is a really big gasket, and everybody has low back strains, which is really rough because we all have to go to work right now because he also didn't leave anything besides wrappers. Like that's a problem. So in that situation, I would say something is better than nothing. And as well, figuring out and finding something that fits your budget. So sure, you might not be able to get the exact type of policy, let's say to protect your income, that you would like, the one that's like just like the car with all the options, but to at least have a vehicle to have something. And I've also found that people are more willing to help other people if it looks like they've tried to help themselves. Meaning you get in those situations, you just feel it's a lot easier to beg when you know that you've actually tried to do things on your own, if that makes sense. Like, hey, I've got this, I got this, I'm tapped, anyway, those are my thoughts there. And you keep saying I don't know anything about your business, Q. And I'm not sure on the journal club you wanted to talk about it, especially because it's recording, but
yeah, man, these are trade secrets. What do you give these things away? Everybody here, just take them.
Yeah. Everybody earmuffs.
No, I say we, as in mostly as in me and my wife.
Okay, cool.
And there's also others involved in that too that are making the decisions and trying to help us along. But on the front end of things, it's me and my wife that are really trying to get things off the ground. And, I mean, obviously making it through, we did a master's program and then a doctoral program with the DPT school. And, I mean, with going through school with 2 kids, I mean, obviously you have a ton of debt that you come out of school with. And then trying to start, a business shortly thereafter.
Where do you live?
North Carolina.
North Carolina. Cool. Where is everybody else from? Chris, you're in Texas, right? Boston. I love Trillium out there. That brewery. Big Trillium fan. Long Island. Cool. Awesome. Texas for now. Got it. That's helpful. I like my orientations. What's funny is like, ooh, where in Ohio, Derek?
So I'm actually from Dayton.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Mhm.
Wow.
Small world.
I know. That's freaking me out.
Yeah.
Cool. That's helpful. What's funny is like I didn't realize all these things till we get to like the end of all of this. And I was like, oh yeah, I don't actually know the people who are here, but some of like those wind up toys, you just turn that key enough and I just get going. But I would say those are my thoughts, Q, is like with kids in the young family, I would say find a minimally viable solution to the situation to say, hey, part of our budget to get more money to infuse these things, like part of your business plan should be to insure and protect your family. Like, I mean, and I would even figure out a way. I haven't been in the conversations, but I'd even imagine talking and explaining, like, it just shows that you're putting a lot of thought into those stuffs and you're, flipping those things over. I don't have any kids, not married, so it's difficult for me to understand exactly where what you're going through. But I've, been in the home of, lived with entrepreneurs, a little bit entrepreneurial myself, watched what happened with my old man. My old man kicking the bucket and watching like the fallout from great intentions, but poor plans. So I would say that would be important. And again, now, when do you like, as far as, I would say if you're going to delay anything, it's putting money into other stuffs, real estate, crypto, that's going to save the world. Apparently, supposedly, I'm not bad mouthing it. I just think I love all the fanfare around anything. And it's laughable at this point with that stuff. But I would say like putting money into IRAs and towards retirement things. I think those types of stuffs I think are fine to delay for an extended period of time if you're committed to it. Now, if you're just kind of half-assing it, I would say quit half-assing it and go get a job, right? But yeah, if we're talking entrepreneurial, I think going after it is important. And I don't have any hard, fast numbers or timelines. I don't think there need to be.
Yeah, no, that's helpful. Just knowing out of some of those players that you put on the field are the non-negotiables up front, regardless of the stage. And for those who are on the call that aren't starting a business, that's fine too. Just knowing that what you are and aren't getting from your employment situation, or maybe you're just renting space as a PT from another business. There are some things that on the front end of this you want to just make sure you're checking the boxes on. And then there's also some things, especially early in your career, as you mentioned, the IRA stuff or these crypto, like other wide receiver type offensive forms of cash flow that could be potentially helpful in the future, are okay to just be like, you know what, let's put those things aside for a second. But,
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, who wants to? I mean, the reason Tom Brady can pull people out of retirement is because he's the best quarterback in the history of football, right? Like, he's invested in himself to be the best. He knows that he can be protected. So players want to come play and surround themselves. So like, you'll attract the players that you want on the field as you invest in yourself and as you make sure that you have good foundational stuffs. And again, like I said, like even healthcare, right? Like something happens to you, Q, and you're not there tomorrow. Your wife and kids, she can go to the state and say, hey, we need health insurance. She can get a health insurance solution there. But if you end up with a spinal cord injury doing whatever, or you end up from a motor vehicle accident, those types of things. All right, Jordan, we'll see you. those types of things like that, where you're still around and it's like now your wife has to try to juggle everything. Oof, especially if you don't have any help. Those are the types of things that I would want solution for. So you die unexpectedly or you get disabled. I think having solutions for those, I think, are pretty critical. Because even with your job thing, if the business dries up or you can't get any money or you have to pause the business, you could try to find a job. You could pick up labor. You could work places and at least generate some income. But those large scale catastrophic things, I don't think they're worth leaving to chance. And it can start small, like something where you say, I got $50 a month that I can put towards this stuff. Cool. What can we get for it? And it's better than nothing. It's not very real world, which I think it's supposed to. But what else? Anything else we want to talk about or that was missed in the student loan stuffs or kind of going over the play chart or any of those types of things that would be helpful?
I guess kind of as we've pivoted into talking about like business side of things rather than student loans, I guess if there were like common things you see done well for like a small business, again, I know that's super vague. Like, do you recommend, I don't know, like it starting out as like a side hustle, or I mean, people going all in on something, like aggressively going after like starting up their own business? Do you think it can be done both, or do you see one way just being more successful, or not as like, yeah.
I think I got what you're saying, Kevin. I think I got it. Like I'll steal the baton. I was just watching those 4x100s earlier this week. I'll steal it. You've run your leg. I got this. So what I would say is what I think you're asking is what can increase my probability of success starting a small business? And is it, burn the ships? Is it those types of things? Yeah, you were fumbling it. That's why I grabbed it, Kevin. It's the fumble is what kept the U.S. out of the finals. I didn't want that to happen again. We got this. So what I was going to say is like, I haven't looked at a lot of like the primary literature in the financial services world because frankly, they don't operate the same way as healthcare. But some of the stuff I have seen on the entrepreneurial side is that statistical success favors people who are bridging into a business, not the people who burn ships. And I think a lot of the burn ship rhetoric comes from people who I would say fall into that survivorship bias. It's like, that's great for you, but how many hundreds, if not thousands of people, even people who have lost that we follow on social media, we're only following them because they've now won and they're telling us about losses, not because they've actually lost. So if you're talking about like just statistical success, the primary literature shows for entrepreneurs it's bridging into the business in some way, shape, form, or capacity. Doesn't mean you have to, but in that case, I think it lends itself to it being a side hustle type of a situation, I guess would be practical application of it. Now, it wasn't talking specifically about healthcare, but that's fine. The one thing that kind of when I was studying and looking at that stuff, it did say that healthcare businesses have a higher statistical likelihood of success than most other businesses because it's something that people want and need. So then you can focus more if you just know that the data is in your favor there, then you worry more about your systems and your process and your deliverable, more of the generic business things, not the fear of success. And so what I would say though is really kind of mapping everything out and troubleshooting your ideas, finding mentors, having people kind of pick it apart and then figuring out that place on where to act are the people who seem to be having the most success. Now, some of the success that I've seen are people who's just been absolute circumstance. They've been thinking about it a lot. They have a unique skill set and then an opportunity fell in their lap. I was just talking to somebody earlier this week and somehow they ended up treating one of the Clemson football players. I didn't realize Clemson didn't have a PT program. Like they didn't treat their players. They didn't use PT. They're just like a surgeon and ATs. Didn't know that. And I actually brought that up to Derek and he goes, yeah, everybody knows that. And I said, well, I guess that means I'm not everybody. But the point is that like this guy treated a player and the coaches were like, well, hot damn, this is kind of neat. And now all of a sudden they're in talks of being able to start kind of provide physical therapy services potentially for, Clemson sports. The only reason that happened is this guy like has been, and nobody sees him on social media. As a matter of fact, his company, he does healthcare stuff for marching bands. Like that's kind of his thing because that's like what he did, And then he got into this cash practice. He's actually in the Carolinas, obviously, but it'd be a hell of a commute from Texas to treat a Clemson player. But anyway, but that was just kind of the thing where he knew, he's like, I want to start this business, and he got very comfortable talking about the process and progress and those types of things. Somebody else saw he was hungry, brought him into their cash practice. So people just know, next thing you know, he gets an opportunity, and then we're into other things. So again, it's that fail early, fail often, fail forward, just trying. I think it's going to create that. Somebody else I know took over a practice that had been in business for 30 plus years because the owner didn't want to work with his son anymore. And he just handshook deal, took over the clinic, and now has 5 of them. Took 1 clinic to 5 clinics, didn't have to pay anything for it. Crazy. But like, you see those things. It's just have an idea of what you want so that you're ready. Luck favors the prepared, right? Isn't that who's the professor who doesn't matter? The last lecture, I think, is what it's called. Randy Posh is his name. That's what he says, is that luck favors the prepared. So as far as like hallmarks of success, I would say really trying to get as crystal clear on what it is that you think you want, and then just start taking swings at it. Not sure if that's helpful, but whatever.
Definitely is.
Yeah. Anything else? If not, then I'm gonna sign off of here, and I agreed to help somebody move a piece of furniture, which I'm not excited about.
No, I think it's a great place to start or to stop. It's been very helpful for me. I literally know nothing about financial stuff. So and neither do my parents. And they sat down with me because they got a financial advisor like, I don't know, 5 years ago. And they sat down with me and they're like, don't do what we did because we're 60 and we're just trying to figure this out.
Yeah. That's actually, Chris, I interrupted you because I think it's important to interrupt at this point, and that it's not, if you think you're really far behind, you're not. The fact that we're even having this conversation already puts you a couple steps ahead of other people and your peers, because as much as it seems like in the media that everybody's got this on lock, I talk to people in their late 40s, 50s, and 60 who are like, all right, kids are out of the house, or we're this, or we've done the things we want to do. Let's start taking this seriously. In the one common thread that all of them say, I wish I just would have started thinking about this earlier because I would have done some things a little bit different. Sorry, continue, Chris.
That's all I had.
Uh,
Yeah, so I'm just glad I'm starting it earlier than my parents.
yeah.
So this is great, man. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
What type of furniture are you moving?
I don't know. This guy who is like helps out and does like odds and ends, who I know is a buddy of mine. His wife's a radiologist, so he's got like a handyman business, because I guess you can do that if your wife pays the bills. Just saw this was still recording, but he won't listen to it. And so he's helped me out with a couple of things. So he's like, hey, I'm calling in a favor. It's like, shit. So and here's how he said, he says, I have a heavy ass piece of furniture that we need to move from the basement upstairs. So it's probably a dresser or something. But his brother-in-law is 37, had a stroke. They found him wandering trails out in Colorado, disoriented. Some other hikers found him. No clue how long he had been out there. Yeah, had a stroke. Crazy. And so somehow, obviously, they had his ID on him. So they called his sister and said, hey, your brother's not doing so great. And so they brought him back here. So I imagine I'm probably moving a piece of furniture for him, isn't that wild? Wild. 37.
Mid-hike.
Just all by himself. Dude's super handy. Like real like outdoorsy. Moved out to Colorado because he wanted to get into the weed industry, like just help out on the farms, and then ends up having a stroke on the trail. What? He said that and my jaw hit the floor. I was like, you've got to be kidding me.
Sounds like
Anyway.
you need some life insurance.
Yeah, he needed disability insurance. I'm sure that pothead didn't have it
All right.
because nothing matters except the next high. Not that I'm anti-drug, because I'm really not. Really not. But we're still recording, so I don't want to get into any of that kind of stuff.
Oh,
But yeah, if any of you guys want to follow along, I don't put out a lot of content. I just get exhausted by that kind of stuff. It's annoying to me. But if you want to like network, or if you ever have any questions, you can just follow me on like social media. If you want to talk like professionally about stuff, I'll just put a couple. I have like the financial physio or whatever it is. I don't even actually know what it is because I never post on it. But that's just a social one. If you want to talk about your situation, I would say here. If that changes, I'll let you know. But yeah, and for those of you still in school, I like seriously, I do give formal presentations to schools all over the country. I generally do it for free because the programs are like poor, supposedly. Even though, look at what's your average student debt? 180,000. Oh, that's weird. Can't pay me to do this. Where's that money going? But no, I think it's for you selfishly. You'll get extra reps. You'll get to hear this in a more formal. We get into a lot more detail, and then you're also it's an easy way to help out your classmates too. But I would say typically anytime during your program is great. Typically before people start looking for jobs is best because you're just more in a more serious mindset.
I may definitely reach out to my chair and ask, because we're like in the middle of our clinical rotations, and then we'll graduate in less than a year. And I think it's like prime time people are thinking about this.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. And if your school gives pushback, because sometimes they do, which is funny because of going out on clinicals and getting fleeced by some of these people who are CIs, like blows my mind the bullshit that they try to teach you.
Yeah.
But then if I come in to talk to somebody about student debt and how to navigate your early professional career, it's like, watch out for this guy. Get out the garlic. He's a vampire. He's just trying to suck blood. He just blows my mind.
I tried
But,
getting Austin Baraki, because he lives in San Antonio, to like come and speak to our class. Because we're in San Antonio, and I asked my professor, and this was like a professional study or professional issues class, and he was like, I looked up barbell medicine and just like I can't because they sell things. And I'm like, you host like weekend like manual therapy courses here.
you're selling me physical therapy,
Yeah.
right? Like your entire program. I came to your school because you sold me on this. Like this whole thing is a sale. That's such bullshit. God, that pisses me off.
Yeah.
So
maybe-
anyway, so if your school gives pushback, as long as there's like 6 people or more, I'm fine setting these types of things up. Just know the fewer people that are present, the more casual and laid back I'll be. But anyway, yeah. I like doing it because I got so stressed out early in clinical practice, and all it would have taken was a few of the things that we talked about, and I'd be like, all right, cool. I don't need to freak out about this. It just makes a huge difference.
Yeah, for sure, man.
But
It
anyway.
is.
Thank you so much, dude.
yeah, not a problem. Q,
Yeah.
what's up?
Man, just wanted to say thanks, because it seems like a lot of the folks that you reach out to, it's almost like we preach so hard in this kind of community of physical therapy, where it's like a patient comes to you with low back pain, you're not going to be telling them like, oh, dude, ooh, buddy,
Yeah.
you have quite the journey ahead.
Yeah,
of you.
I've never seen such a bad back.
Yeah, it's like, ooh, herniated disc. Ooh, got to tell you how hard this is going to be.
Yeah.
But it's so funny because all these same clinicians, when you ask about business, are like, oh, dude, it's going to be the most intense, hardest thing. You're going to have to sacrifice life and limb, dude. Like,
It's
fuck
impossible.
everything in your life, dude, because, yeah, you're just going to be drowning forever.
Yeah, you're gonna die. You can't
Yeah.
do it. It's not
Yeah,
possible.
you're like, what? No.
Who do you think you are, Jeff Bezos?
What?
Like, that's like who they are. They're like, you mentioned business, and they're like, oh, so you want to be Jeff Bezos? Like, yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah.
Yeah. So, anyways, appreciate it. I'll probably be reaching out to you in the near future here.
Yeah, for sure. And don't delay it. If you're thinking about it, do it. I'll talk to people who are like, yeah, I meant to reach out to you 3-4 years ago. I'm like, all right, well, had a lot more runway then. Anyway, no, it was great. I enjoyed this.
Thanks, man. Good luck moving the furniture.
Yeah, if I end up with a splinter, I'll let you know.
Okay, perfect.
Take
All
it easy,
right.
guys.
See
Thanks,
ya.
Will.
Bye.